Welcome to the second part of my conversation with Wouter. In the first episode, we talk about the past, the history of the development of common criteria and the high assurance security evaluation and certification. And we move on to the creation of Cessip. I hope you have a good basic understanding about this industry and the thinking behind all this methodology and the market. In this episode, we're talking about the future. And this is why I think this episode is really blowing my mind. If you spend enough time, like me, to think about this industry and how we are going to bring security evaluation and certification from high assurance to basic assurance and from limited number of products to millions of products, then I think you will enjoy a lot from this conversation because we go into certain details about the challenges. And when you know the challenges, when you know the problem, you also can think of the solution. And that really inspired me a lot. And like the Chinese ancient saying, if you know what you know, and if you know what you don't know about a topic, that means you really know about the topic. And if you don't, please ask AI. What? No, it's not the Chinese saying. Pretty sure it's Confucius. He didn't say anything about AI? Okay. My imaginary friend said the first part is from Confucius, but the second part is not said by him. Anyway, joke aside. I hope you like this episode, and if you do like it, please like and subscribe so you don't miss the future episodes. Again, there will be a blog post on my further thinking about this topic and some other things that were not said in the episode. I'll put the link of the blog post in the description of this podcast. And thank Shichi again for the music and Narashima for the cover art. If you have any question, comments, suggestions, please let me know. Have a good learning.
I want some, yeah.
So we still yet to see the more and more adoption, but I think Cessip already does better than I originally expected, because what I observe is that when you don't have certain regulation or some demands, mandatory things, then people do not just voluntarily do some security evaluation or get the certification. But I do see more adoption of Cessip in the recent years. So I hope with the CRA it will also become more, and now it's under global platform. So I think they're also trying to.
Not really. So Cessip went from something that Dirk and I made to NXP, and NXP donated it to global platform.
Yeah.
And global platform donated it to Sensenelec.
Okay.
So the global platform still hosts the work groups for alignment and promotion and reuse and things like that. But officially the standard is in Sensenelec.
Yeah.
And that makes it a standard that is usable for the EU Cyber Resilience Act because it's an EU standard. And the next step would be to make it from Sensenelec to ISO or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, what the CRA recognizes the EN one, the EN.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. This was the Sensenelec version is the one that the CRA accepts. And one of the things that you have in the Cyber Resilience Act is there are different classes of products. Everything is default unless it is one of the other ones. And then you have the important one and important two and critical. In the critical class, you need to use a Cybersecurity Act scheme, CSA scheme, and there is only one, there's the EUCC.
Yeah.
And so if you're in critical, you basically need to do an EUCC certification. If you're in important, and especially in important 2, you need to have third-party testing.
Yeah.
And it needs to be against either a harmonized test standard, which is a vertical for specifically for
cars or
something, and there are something like 43 of them currently in development. But if you have one of those harmonized test standards, the idea behind harmonized test standard is that it's a checkmark test, that there's no interpretation. We just spent, I don't know how long, talking that there is always interpretation. So a harmonized test standard will work for things that are very functionally testable.
Yeah.
So the crypto validation testing is a good example. You can specify that. So these are the test vectors, or this is the way you do the test vectors. This is the kind of testing that needs to go out. The entropy of random number generators, you can make a standard for that. The analysis of the entropy of a random number generator, a bit of an art science thing. That it's definitely not something that's cookie cutter. And so in that sense, by and large, a new harmonized test standard will only work if the functionality is very well defined, both as in the functionality that should be in, and also that the other functionality can't break it. Sidestep. We both have laser printers on $300-400 at home. Those things can fax over the internet.
Yeah.
Because that's functionality that was in 15 years ago in these products, and it still comes into that. How are you going to test that?
Yeah.
So you need to have a domain where the products have a specific amount of functionality that's well defined and no more that can impact the security claim. And when we lost most of the Internet of Things because they're always adding more. And you can test that in a way that basically is black box, non-adaptive. And so that's a very limited set of things that you can do. And so you always, in my view, you're always in the situation that you need a horizontal standard, something that can adapt to your domain. And now we're back to Comcateria, not necessarily EUCC, just Comcateria as a standard and Cessip as a standard. And because Cessip is standing to they're both acceptable for Europe. And so in that sense, CC and Cessip as standards are the ones that you will use to address new domains. And I'm arguing probably most of the domains that are trying to do harmonized test standards, I think they will run into all of the problems that we described before, that you need flexibility, that you need subjectivity to adapt, and that you need composition, and they always forget to do that. And maintenance and patching and all of that stuff. So unless it's a very thin niche, you'll end up with something that looks just like Cessip or CC. And so therefore, TrustedB is aiming to reusing the CC and Cessip and not the harmonized test standards. And so in that view, Cessip is going to be useful. The reason why I'm often talking about teddy bears is because that was the model that we had in our mind. You have this talking teddy bear that's connected to the internet. That is an important class 2 product because it's talking to kids. It has personal information with a camera, maybe camera, microphone, sensors. It is connected to your local LAN. It's not quite as bad as those fridges that were supposed to tell you that your milk is soured and already ordered new stuff, because then it has health information, your cholesterol intake, and money. And to do that, a talking teddy bear manufacturer, they buy a development kit. They don't know what chip is in there. You can trust them to follow the small set of security guidelines in the SD, but that's about it. They don't know what side channel analysis is, and nor should they. They make a cool teddy bear. And so that was always our view. We need to have these platforms. That's why Cessip is a security evaluation standard for IoT platforms. But it could also be products, right? That always was the idea. But this scales up to end products.
Methodology-wise, it allows the end product to be...
The Teddyware is a platform in the teddy bear universe, right? All of these things, by definition, they're connected. Because IoT devices, right? So they're connected in some way. So it's just where you put the limit. And the SFRs were made for products. And that's in the end what they described. You will see that they're in Cessip, they're not... Pretty much all of the requirements can be seen from the outside. The only ones that aren't visible from the outside, so the destruction of data, residual information protection, are in there because there are government requirements that say you have to check this. But for the rest, it is externally visible behavior. And so I think Cessip is perfectly geared to adapting that. It's also, it's readable, it's flexible enough. It's not too flexible. So you actually have some content in there with the assurance levels, the Cessip levels. And that's why there's a big uptake in using this in the chips, because they're the first ones that need to do this. And then you have the chips, and on top of that, the platforms will happen. And then you'll have the libraries and then the whole product stack. And that's also how they're developing now. You see free RTOS coming on top and things like that.
But the teddy bear was also a great example about composition, because you're not expecting the teddy bear vendor to pay for all the security. I mean, they pay for it when they buy the chip, but not to satisfy CRA or that kind of thing.
Yeah, but if they buy a certified chip, the cost of checking that security is spread over all the chips. And if they have to do it themselves, they suddenly have to pay the whole cost of that chip certification additionally. So it actually makes the whole thing cheaper. Significantly cheaper.
Exactly.
Let alone that in some cases impossible.
And shared. I mean, the cost is not just at one party, but shared through the whole supply chain.
Spread out, and that's important because the margins in the IoT world are very thin, and the requirements of the CRE are harsh. This went up to 2.5% of your worldwide revenue, not on the products, but as a company, if you get this wrong. And on the other hand, you're not making that kind of profit on the teddy bear. So we need this load sharing. The positive version of it is that chips and platforms that provide easy to use security are now more valuable. Because they save you a lot of the conformance claim work. You can say, okay, for these things, we use a certified one. Here's a certificate done. That's a lot easier than doing your own testing or having your own lab do the testing on this.
We went a bit more into the detail on Cessip because we have someone who created it here. So it's a wasted opportunity if we don't go into it. But if we go back to TrustCB, you're not only common criteria and Cessip, but you also in the past years collect a lot of, or become the certification body of different schemes, right? Because a scheme, you have a scheme owner, or in case GSMA, it's a scheme owner, and then, but he doesn't have any experience in the product type or in certification. So they say, okay, TrustCB is my CB for that. And in that, I think TrustCB is also trying to link all the things together to satisfy it. And I remember when we talked about certification before, you also mentioned things like boutique certifications. You were creating a certification for the drone, for example, but that didn't really pick up. I think probably was also because of this regulation. If there's no regulation, people are not doing it. But do you see that it will work in the future, or is not, or is the way to go, like the domains, the different 40-something domains under CRA, or it will still be more horizontal?
Yeah, our friend Carlos has a view with a Venn diagram with 3 circles. And it said, look, we came from a world where certification was mandatory.
Yeah.
Right? So it's market access. To you. If you don't have this, then you don't get to play on the market. And one of the reasons why the CRA in Europe is such a big thing is because it is linked to the CE mark and your right to be on the market.
Yeah.
And so that makes it mandatory. And another version of this is that certification reduces the cost or risk for the next customer. And this is the composition. Right? If by doing a certification of the chip, the next customer doesn't have to worry about that failing.
Yeah.
And the last one is basically differentiation marketing. And you want to show that you have a more secure one. That is a market force, but if that is the only reason to do certification, we will usually say, are you sure? Because for the cost of your evaluation and certification, you can buy a lot of marketing. And there are some cases where it is a good differentiator, but most of the time not. So, for example, the drone scheme that I designed, there's a confounding variable because I designed it just before COVID, and then it was a bit hard to get to the place where most of these roads were made. But it's an example where there was no requirement. And it would have been a useful aspect to show if cybersecurity was the problem for acceptance. So, for example, right now in the US, Asian drones are by and large banned. And part of that argumentation is about data security and the fear that all these drones are sending information to a foreign country and that can be used for espionage and such. That would have been a place where a certification that doesn't happen would be in place, would have helped. And we're seeing development like that in the AI world. So you're using something of AI. How do I know that my query data isn't used into the training of the new parts, and therefore my social security number shows up sometime or something like that? So there is some demand for that, but by and large, for us to make it worthwhile for us to make a scheme for a domain and quantum widget, it needs to have a demand. And just give you an order of magnitude idea, to set up a scheme and to make the documentation and to get it through the accreditation body and to set up all the quality systems and make the documents, it all seems simple. But by the time you've done that, it's about 100K. That means that a scheme needs to do about 1 million to make it worth it, right? Revenue. And to make it worth doing that. And so, yes, it's a significant step to make a scheme for something.
But for some things, it's also not evaluatable because we always say for the drones or a lot of things that is banned by US or Europe sometimes, the thing is that even with evaluation, you cannot say there's no backdoor because the backdoor can be hidden, and even if you want
in the next update.
Yeah, exactly. So in that case, for drone and maybe some telecom devices, even if you do a very thorough evaluation, probably the government still say, I still don't trust. It's still based on a certain trust between the nations instead of real practical.
Well, so there is a development in the Cybersecurity Act 2.0 to go towards trusted supply chains. And part of that is country of origin. Part of that is also really difficult to say. In our domain of smart cards, that chip has probably gone through 50 countries. The design facilities are in at least 5 countries, spread over 2-3 continents, right? It gets a bit tricky to say where what is coming from. One of the things in Cessip, for example, one of the SFRs I considered putting in is these are the only sensors in this device. So no microphone, for example. And the origin was that there was a thermostat, that smart thermostat that had an undisclosed microphone on the PCB. And the idea was that later they might want to introduce smart home automation by voice.
Yeah.
And so they already put the microphone on and they never used it. But from a consumer point of view, is why does my thermostat eavesdrop me? So I wanted to make an SVR that basically said, okay, these are the only sensors or only things it can sense. And the reason why I removed it is because it's almost impossible to test.
Yeah.
And one of the examples that we had in this is that the camera on a phone can see the movement of light objects in the scanning of the pixels enough to reconstruct voice. And so I have something that only has a camera and no microphone. I can't say it doesn't measure audio. It probably already measures temperature, right? There was just no way to test this. So the absence of sensors, cameras, there are all kinds of side channel analysis attacks that use features that you would say, really? This is reusable? So it's really difficult to, very difficult to, probably impractical to exclude that something gathers information it shouldn't. You can do bandwidth limitations. In some cases, you can check that it doesn't do that. So most of these devices that can wake up by saying a code word, and I won't say now, do not, okay, have dedicated chips solely listening to this. So it's not like the microphone is always listening and the general CPU is processing. No. There's a chip that does only that. And that's the reason why you can't chase the code words, because it's pre-trained. But that is a domain that is not easily solved technically.
But I would say for a better society, probably it's not science fiction. What we should do is also the bottom line. What is the basic security that we should cover with the certification, which at least will avoid the scammers and things. You cannot stop a nation level attacker, but probably a scammer.
One of the luxury problems that I have is that as Trustway we make a lot of things seem easy, but you have things like nearly all standards have no default password as a requirement. How are you testing this? So are you taking the user manual and looking for the word password? What if it's installation code? What if it is not in the user manual, but in the installation guideline? Do you check the binary? Do you check the binary for strings? Do you deobfuscate it? Do you look at whether it has a simple calculation? Do you reverse engineer it? Do you check the interfaces?
How do you know there's no super admin hidden?
Or that it's in an interface that you didn't expect. Or an interface that is accidental.
That's why I say it's very difficult for a high assurance evaluator to do basic assurance evaluation, because for you see all the possibilities and
because we know that if you're naive, you're missing things. And it's true, and we've talked quite a bit about it. On the high level, it's a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of expertise. But our arguments was the color of the laser right? Our argument is not, did we cover 1 or 2% of the interfaces, right? In the high end, we have enough budget to do a good job. And to be convinced of a good job. On the mid-range that we're talking about for IoT, a lot of it is sampling, a lot of it is, which means that you're missing things in the parts that you don't sample. A lot of it will be, if you can't automate it well, you're going to miss stuff because the budget isn't that big. And so if you look at, for example, the FITSM methodology, to compensate for that is one of the things that they have in the methodology is if you find a vulnerability, the project stops and you fail.
Okay.
And if you want to redo, you need to resubmit a full new thing. So you get a new time limited, but a new penetration test.
Oh.
And that is appropriate because you're going to find things.
But it brings a bit to the next thing I want to ask. You have been doing this. I think also common criteria was not created in a connected world or AI world, or now we see Cessip, of course, improves the speed and improves the transparency. But in my view, the world demands something even quicker, or maybe not quicker at the evaluation part, but you to extend to the life cycle of the product. Of course, at this moment you want to check there's no vulnerability, but tomorrow there might be a new vulnerability. So it's probably more important that you have something to follow up on the vulnerability instead of have a perfect thing for 5 years.
Yeah, and it's
so where are we
Yeah.
going with certification?
Yeah, because people read the certificate and the expiry date as a certificate as a sort of best before.
Yeah.
So this thing is secure until the validity is extended. That's not what a certificate really says. What a certificate really says is at the moment of issuance, we were convinced with the assurance level that there is no attack within the attack potential. Right? That's what we're seeing. That against the functionality, blah blah. So it's already, if a second after issuance of a certificate, some vulnerability becomes known but isn't reported to us, we will not automatically know to revoke the certificate.
No.
So it is already a snapshot in time. So what we right now depend on is that we, as in the community, the developer, evaluator, certifier, and the market surveillance authorities and such, monitor the vulnerabilities. And if there is cause to doubt a certificate, you check whether that is an impact. And one of the ways to enable that is with the software bill of materials, which would allow that with the products, the developer gives us software bill of material that says, okay, this includes this Linux kernel, this OpenSSL, and blah, blah. So that if there is a vulnerability in the Linux kernel, you can at least know that you need to think about that, whether in your product that is a problem or not.
Yeah.
The problem is that the Linux kernel publishes SVEs for each potentially impacting bug report.
No.
So I don't know what the current rate was, but a time ago it was 1 per hour.
Okay.
And 1 per hour of something that might be a vulnerability, right? Probably not, but might be. And so in the situation where we have a list of products certified with their SBOMs and a feed of these potential vulnerabilities on the components of the product, we still have the problem of how do we make sure that these are positive or negative. So you need to match the vulnerability reports to the SBOM.
Yeah.
Like all good domains, there are multiple standards for the SBOM. There are 2 big ones. They both have a procedure to check the name of and version of the product in the SBOM to vulnerability thing. Methods are different, and it does things like remove the registered or the trademark comment. But what do you do with the version and the capitalization? Is one lowercase a or in one higher case a, is that the same or different? I have examples of both. I have in the smart card world, that bit is often used to indicate a significant change. In other worlds, it's the same thing. So even matching the report to the SBOM in an automated way without false positives or negatives is really tricky. And then seeing the impact is tricky. Now, there's a whole industry in this domain that try to match that, and especially try to reduce the amount of false positives, because they will overwhelm you. So that's just on reporting. Then in an ideal world, you would have the products in the lab in a test rig, and every, I don't know, month or so, the lab retests the product against the newer attack, right? Yeah, it's on the. That's a lot of products, right? And then the tests need to be 100% automated. So if the thing hangs and the reset needs to be the same, there cannot be a human doing anything or interpreting it. And then you have the problem that the software probably changed. Yeah. Right? So you not only need to do the retesting, but you also need to retest and update and reverse, and right? Retest. And so you need to have a version that can roll back versions, which often is not allowed to do this automated. All of this is engineerable, right? We know developers have warehouses full of test equipment, right? It's doing specifically this. So it's possible. It's possible to do this. And I think that is where we're going to go if we want high quality ongoing certification. Yeah. The good news is if you have something that it's not a monoculture, but if you have a situation where the requirements are always the same, the implementation is roughly always the same, and the way of testing is automated and always the same. Yeah. For example, Java cards, right? You can mostly do that, or Android. You can make a test setup that does the mobile device security certification or the mobile devices and retests that fairly automatically. Yeah. And then you can do recertification with updates or downgrades and variants, and there's a new attack or there's a new model. You can do that efficiently. So then you get sort of a chain of testing that is going to happen, and it's going to be more not in production, in design phase, integrated. There will be more integration between the developer and a chosen lab, so that they have an interfacing on technical but also in personal level. And that is what is happening on high-end pen testing. So, and the web pen testing, that's what happens there. Yeah. They're continuously retesting with new attacks. They're interfacing with bug reporting of the developer, and they're domains where this is happening. This is doable. It's a domain where I think we should go if we want high quality certification and maintenance. There are a lot of details there that are painful. Like versions. It's as silly as that.
It sounds like a lot of costs, but also,
well, this is probably cheaper.
Keep at the high assurance still. Can you see a world that everyone does this?
Well, so for the developers, let's use Android on televisions as an example. It's basically always Android. Android is designed to be one of the aspects of how it is now evolving is that you can test by computer that doesn't have pre-installed applications that have more access than they should. That the checks on the permissions are correct. Then you can automate a lot of the testing that says, okay, is this the real Android kernel? Yes. So there's no modification. Yes. Are these features disabled? These features enabled? This not on, that on. All of that can be done automated. Yeah. Still means that you need to have a standard way to connect to that television to do all the tests. You probably need some sort of authenticator or something, and a specific block to connect to that. That makes the testing of that brand or that series of televisions something that you do with one lab, because they have the one-time setup to get that interfacing right. And after that, they just hook up televisions or potentially even oversee the developer hooking it up and doing the testing. There are all kinds of quality control aspects to this, but we do that in other domains too. So you could do sort of ongoing testing of series.
Yeah.
One-offs have that setup cost. And so the reason why these series work is because you're spreading, just like with the chips, and you're spreading the investment over all of the products.
Yeah.
And so smaller batches of products or smaller developers, or they will have a harder time with this, and they will have less opportunities to spread the cost. So they will need to go more to pre-certified components to reduce the cost, which from security point of view is actually better, right? Because they'll get higher quality for lower cost, but the cost will increase a bit. So yes, in the end, we had some rules here in Europe about the energy label of a house. And the quality control on the testing of that label issuance was inadequate. And as a result, at some point, you would get an energy label for $5. Just €5 for the energy label, because they weren't doing anything. And they had an automated website, and if you clicked the right things, it gave you an A. And
like a housing label.
And it was not, there was nothing done, right? And that is a risk in this area. And all of these regulations, if they're not enforcing real quality and allowing the market authorities and the oversight organizations are allowing poor quality testing or analysis, then there will be a race to the bottom, because everyone wants to reduce costs, and that will mean that there is not actual testing, and then the quality is less important, and then the added value becomes less important, and then we have a €5 certificate. That doesn't say anything. On the other hand, if we keep the quality high enough, then in the beginning it's going to sting, but then very quickly you start to have these pipelines of product testing, and then suddenly a lot of these things are upfront good. And then the low-hanging fruit is gone.
Yeah, so we still need TrustCB to make things still looks very simple, and then the people will think, oh, okay, it's actually not so much work.
It's like the duck, right? And on the surface, it seems very smooth sailing, and underneath it's moving quickly. It's possible, and I think we should, just as a civilian. It's silly that we're in 2026 and most devices have a default password. It's silly that we're in 2026 and things don't last long on the internet, right? I have a washing machine. It can apparently turn on the washing when the electricity price is low. The vendor cannot tell me how it works, which protocol it has.
Okay.
But it is connected to the internet, and it's sending something. Europe tends to have, politically, it takes a long time. And then at some point, the European Commission says, and now is enough. We've been telling you all the time that you need to do something about privacy. You haven't done anything. Now we're putting in law. Now, usually the law is a bit of an overshoot. And then we have the cookie banners the whole time. So it's not really helping. But they do suddenly shift it. And that's how now the Cyber Resilience Act is. Worldwide, this is sort of the first time it gets enforced on a big scale. It's going to be important that they keep the lower bar on a good quality, because otherwise it's going to be empty paperwork.
Exactly. So finally, I need to ask about two disrupting technologies. One is AI and one is quantum computing. So how do you see them from the security point of view? How it will, of course, quantum is very clearly, first is it will break everything we have, all the crypto that we have previously. But how do you see AI or age AI and especially now AI are at the age at the IoT device, which Cessip also address. So what's your view on that?
Let's quickly address quantum, so that we have that out. So from my point of view, quantum computers are mostly a problem on the asymmetric key and the asymmetric key setup, usually. So we have post-quantum crypto-safe algorithms for that, and they're being deployed. The biggest risk there is that somebody like the commission decides that we need another curve, another parameter set for the thing, and it's a bit too late. Right now, they're already deploying these post-quantum cryptos in the mobile network infrastructure. We can't add another curve. It's just not enough time. Post-quantum crypto is only relevant when we have a working quantum computer that can break RSA or ECC. Currently, it seems very far away, but the problem is some of the secrets protected need to stay secret for 30, 50 years. So in 30, 50 years, there might be one that works, and we can't take the chance. Mm. So in that sense, quantum computer problem is sort of solved. We're deploying the post-quantum crypto stuff, and that should be good enough. Yeah. In the AI world, there are many different layers. I am currently not impressed by the quality that AI has for finding vulnerabilities. Mm. And this might be because the kind of products that come to TrustCB already have a high quality. So AI kind of approaches, they're finding low-hanging fruits that shouldn't be in the kind of products we get applied. So I'm currently looking at them, and I don't. Even if the labs could run these tools on it, which is a problem because often the source code is secret and you can't do an online testing. You definitely cannot send the source codes to one of the AI companies. Right. But you can have your own hosted version of these things in some cases. So right now, it doesn't seem like that is going to be significantly useful, but maybe in a few years. It's one of the things we tracked. And for example, when AI meant recognizing pictures with convolution networks, neural networks, that is something that's used in sidechain analysis. So somebody said, okay, the power consumption is labeled with the key and said, okay, that's a picture. So instead of recognizing a horse in a distorted picture, you're recognizing FF in the power part. And that is now one of the ways that we do AI on power sidechain analysis. Mm-hmm. And that is more a belt and suspenders approach, just sort of equivalent to a human in it, but it was good that we started doing that. Now AI means LLMs, and we're keeping an eye on what the LLMs can do. Code review, not very impressive. Most code review tools are better, especially better at false positives and negatives. The other places we see it is in reviewing the documents and generating the documents. Yeah. And especially on the low end in, for example, CRA and such and Cessip 1, you're essentially reviewing an application form. Yeah. Right? And LLMs are reasonably good at, okay, this application form claims that these are the only crypto algorithms, and can then read this functional spec and see, oh yeah, that's the crypto algorithms and are identified or not, which is just a document part. So those might be interesting to automate. Yeah. There's a bit of discussion on whether that's financially interesting or not, but that is something an LLM could do. I'm already going to predict that in the next CC conference, there will be presentations about people writing security targets with LLMs, and then other people reading security targets with LLMs. Because in the end, a security target is, I don't know, 10 bits of information, something like that, right? So it's a tone name, what features, something like that. And then you bloat this with a generative LLM that is going to make up stuff. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, you're going to decompress it, add additional hallucinations, and get the same information. How about we just write a simple one, right? And not pad it. That's my personal style. So, hey, look, if we can't human read it, why is it better if the computer does it for us? Right? How about we make it human readable, which is the whole thing about Cessip. So I think there will be people enthusiastically using it, and there's some places where it's useful. Already read me through this document and give me a list of references, those kind of things, so that you can still use it as a human. I think that will be not as disruptive as it currently seems. It's always hard to say in a hype curve, but I'm not. It's too slot machine-ish. The output is non-deterministic. It uses a random number generator to choose its answer, so it won't give you the same answer twice.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem in an evaluation. It's when it goes off in hallucination land, it sounds very convincing.
Right.
It's really hard to spot where it's going off. With humans, it's easier.
Mm.
You start the stuttering and the weasel words and the structure looks wrong. And it's one of the things we can do. We can just sort of look through what's that.
Mm.
And because we can see the structure changing, that is going to go away because those documents will be reauthored by an LLM and it all looks convincing, but it isn't. So we're going to see quite a bit of things in there that it's going to make some of our work harder.
It's quite a reassuring for the evaluation world.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't have to lose our job now.
Well, so even if, like all of these technologies, right, we had the code review tools, right? That didn't make code review less valuable skill. It just meant that the painful part of going through every printf and seeing now the tool could do. Right. So I can see that LLMs are going to take away the boring part. I have a bit of a concern on how are you going to learn. As a new evaluator, new code reviewer, new writer, that junior task might be LLM worthy. And again, right now, as we're recording this, there's a lot of discussion on the price, whether it actually competes with a human or not. But let's say it competes with a human. How is the junior going to learn the skills that you need to do the more advanced work? I don't know. As the older guy, I'm sort of looking at it and saying, and how is the youth going to learn? We've Latin texts that say the same thing. So this is always true, right? It's just in this case, I noticed that when I'm working with just playing with the LLMs, it's good at rewriting documents. It's really useful as a text editing tool. It regularly does things like, I've changed these things. And then you look at the document and wasn't changed. And you call it on and say, you're right. And then patches itself and it still doesn't do it. And so this is worse than a human.
Yeah. Sometimes they're very stupid. Sometimes. Yeah.
But sound very convincing, right? And even
so I asked them something. He said, this time you are right. Yeah. You identified the mistake. Now I have changed it. Please look at it. And you said that no, it's still there.
It's still there. That might be something they fix later. It's I'm looking at. I don't see actual real big improvements. I do see them as very interesting tools to play with. Very convincing tools, and there will be things in there. There might be other AI things. So I know that there is quite some advancement in the design technology, for example, for hardware optimization, and that might be really useful. In previous, these sort of genetic algorithms, we've had situations where it would find a solution that we didn't know why it worked. But then we'll get a question of, in an evaluation, you need to show why it is secure, not that we couldn't break it. Provable things are always going to be important. Tooling for exploits is rapidly firing up. We've had several of those layers. In my time when Windows NT was a big thing, there were tools that would take the patches, reverse engineer what the change was, and the patch bar was, and make an exploit for that, and would do that within the 24-hour patch cycle, because the patches go in during the night over the world, right? So there were tools that would make an exploit based on the patch. We're seeing similar things now. But again, I don't think that is AI. I think that's more tooling.
Yeah. It just gave me an interesting image you said about the cost of doing evaluation by AI and human, and we are not sure who is more expensive. It's just like, all the low-level ST check we let the human do, and we AI do the more high-value exploits.
Yes. I spoke with a startup that was doing neural networks by cloning human cells into nerve cells and then putting them on a chip. So you could literally have your ghost in a machine.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it. I am intrigued and abhorred by the idea that my neurons somewhere
will live forever now.
Yeah.
Oh, but you mentioned that, but that's a part that I really liked about when I joined Brightside, because I grew up in Asia, so a lot of things I didn't catch, some cultural things and stuff, and I learned so much in the first few years in Brightside, because like you and Lex, and you talk about, because I think I borrowed some DVD or book from you, The Ghost in the Shell. And then I start to read into that. It was really fun. Okay, final question is that is there anyone in our industry that you recommend me to interview?
I would definitely talk with Carlos Atos. So if I'm the person to talk about how you do certification, evaluation, and methodologies and things like that, he's the one you should talk to. And okay, but how do you sell it? How do you sell it? As in, how do you sell it, especially internally? Yeah. So all of these discussions that we had about return on investment and is it worth it? Is it possible to do? What kind of scales are there? What kind of incentives are there? Carlos has an excellent view on that.
Yeah, Carlos worked in Brightside for a few years, so I talked to him last week. That he's back in global platforms, so I know where to find him.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wouter.
Thank you. See you again.
See you again. Let's do it every year.
Yeah, sure.
And then we'll see how AI.
Yes.
If your prediction on AI is correct.
Oh, damn it! We didn't put any money on it or drinks.